Excuse me. Let's go on. Move now to our continuing coverage of the trial of George Zimmerman and the killing of Trayvon Martin. The Florida murder trial of George Zimmerman looks to be on track for opening statements and witnesses to begin testifying next Monday. Our coverage of the killing of Trayvon Martin and the trial of George Zimmerman, prosecutors and defense lawyers today will begin their final round of questioning of 40 prospective jurors, eventually picking 6 jurors and at least 4 alternates. The process has not been without moments of humor, as the questioning of Juror 81 showed yesterday.
There is no doubt in your mind that you have not formed an opinion as to the guilt or innocence of this defendant. Is that correct?
I don't have enough facts to make a value judgment. And honestly, that's how I truly feel about this. I'm neither one side or the other. And I'm not trying to apply for this job as a juror. Just to be clear, this is how I approach all of these cases.
Used to try to paint a picture of what happened the night Trayvon Martin died. But without any eyewitnesses, crime scene photos, interviews, surveillance video, and the autopsy report will have to tell the tale. Arise News correspondent Leila McDowell reports.
It's around 5 to 7 p.m., February 26, and Trayvon Martin has about 20 minutes to live. This convenience store surveillance video shows Martin buying candy and iced tea just before his fatal confrontation with George Zimmerman. It's just one piece to a tragic puzzle prosecutors and defense attorneys will try to build in different ways for the jury.
He just said he shot him. Yes, the person is dead, laying on the grass.
The hundreds of pieces of evidence include crime scene photos, interviews, surveillance videos, and reports. Each is one verse to the story: the bullet casing in the grass, Zimmerman's 9mm gun and holster, photos of Zimmerman taken just minutes after the shooting. It appears he has a broken nose and there are bloody cuts on the back of his head. Zimmerman maintains he was straddled by Martin while he was being assaulted. That's when he fired his gun. But Martin's autopsy found that the bullet entered the left side of his chest horizontally. The wound was surrounded by gunpowder burns, and the two men were only 18 inches apart when the 9mm gun was fired.
Are you following him? Yeah. Okay, we don't need you to do that.
There are the 911 calls that also tell a tale of both before.
So you think he's yelling help?
Yes.
All right, what is your phone number?
There's gunshots.
And after the deadly confrontation. There's Zimmerman's other calls to 911 over the previous year about suspicious individuals he saw. 5 times he made the call to the Sanford Police Department about teenagers. All of them were black, walking through his neighborhood.
He's got his hand in his waistband. And he's a black male.
Then there are things the jury will never hear. If George Zimmerman was under the influence of a substance, no one will ever know. He was not given a blood or alcohol test after the shooting. Sanford police immediately operated on the assumption that he was defending himself. But an autopsy on Trayvon Martin showed traces of marijuana in the teen's system the night he died. But Judge Nelson has ruled that, and pictures of Martin holding a gun will also be kept from the jury. Leila McDowell, Arise News, Washington.
Joining us now to give us their perspective on the role that evidence will play in this case are former prosecutor and Arise legal contributor Royce Russell and Lawrence Kobilinsky, who is a professor of forensic science at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. Hello, gentlemen. Thank you so much for coming in.
Pleasure.
It's good to see both of you. Okay, so let's start with what's happening right now. So they now have the pool of 40 that they need to go into the second round of interviewing. So we've talked a little bit before about how these questions will be different than the preliminary questions. Right. Let's explore that a little bit. And might this take an equal amount of time to getting to this 40 to get down to the 60? To the 6, right?
You know, my viewpoint is that the court is being very optimistic in the time schedule that it is setting. And the court can lay a heavy hand to make sure that attorneys move quickly, But what is really going to determine whether this process takes longer or not is the responses that the potential jurors give. If I give a response that may taint a jury panel or give a response that may make others think about other questions that they didn't bring to the surface or feelings that they didn't bring to the surface, whether it's cultural, whether it's racial, whether it has to do with the law itself, stand your ground law, and the positioning thereof, then that process has to be feathered out. You have to do your due diligence, because it is my perspective in this case is that the jury is the most important thing in this case. We have evidence, we have forensics, we have circumstantial evidence, but that jury pool is the end-all, be-all.
And the second round, I'm coming to you in just a second, Larry. The second round, though, you get down to those nitty-gritty questions.
Yes.
How do you feel about stand your ground, as you've already said, about gun reform, all these issues that people have really clear opinions and sometimes emotional reactions to. So could this take another week or two just to get through this process?
I believe so. I believe so. I don't think it's going to be quick and dirty. I think it's going to be a process, once again, where people really come into grips with their emotions about legislation, come to grips with the right to defend oneself, come to grips with maybe racial tension, and that may take a while.
Wow, so okay, so we have to dig in here. So Lawrence, let's bring you into this. So now we're talking about the evidence. So because there was no eyewitness, there was no surveillance camera that videotaped the actual shooting. Talk about how the evidence will play a role in this case.
Well, as of this point, we have only one story as to what happened. Trayvon Martin can't give his story, but George Zimmerman has. So we can look at that physical evidence and decide whether it's consistent with what George Zimmerman is saying, or it negates what he's saying. And there is a lot of physical evidence. There certainly is autopsy evidence. We have the clothing that Trayvon Martin was wearing. We know that he was killed by a single shot to the left side of the chest that penetrated his ventricle, killing him. And we know exactly the track of that bullet, front to back, straight across at the level of the nipples. And so we know that the gun that was used is a Kel-Tec PF9 9mm gun, and we know that now we know the distance that the muzzle of the gun was from the target. In fact, it was about a little over 6 inches. So we're talking about something that looks like a struggle. Also, the physical evidence shows that George Zimmerman had a trauma to his head. There was bleeding from the nose, from the back of the head. He is saying there was a struggle. The ballistics evidence is consistent with that. What we can't really get a handle on is motive, and more importantly, who was the aggressor? Because, I mean, the law really is based on who started this thing, who is the aggressor. George Zimmerman is talking about self-defense, but really the issue is who really started this process going forward. I'm not sure that the physical evidence can address that, but it certainly can. We can use it to reconstruct the events. The back of George Zimmerman's garments there's botanical matter. George Zimmerman was saying he was on his back with Trayvon Martin on top of him, punching him. There again is consistency with his story.
Well, even beyond the physical evidence, Royce, this charge, it's second-degree murder, which means you have to prove a depraved mind. How do you use evidence? How does the prosecution use evidence to prove that?
Well, it is going to be extremely hard to go into what one's state of mind was in any case. However, there is evidence that gives us room to think about that. There is evidence that gives us a quick snap preview of what he was thinking in that the 911 calls or the calls to the police station where, you know, he appears not to be adhering to the advice of law enforcement, which goes into the crux of this case. What was his intent? Why did he not adhere to police commands of not to follow this individual? Is that aggression over the line, and did that aggression take him to a place that he need not be, in that aggression led him to attack Trayvon Martin? As a good doctor said, there is only one story because unfortunately Trayvon is not here to tell his side. However, there are factors and evidence that goes around the forensic, because the forensic is stubborn. It's not going to change, but there are factors that go around that give us a better picture, a more complete picture of what took place, who was the aggressor and why was this person being so aggressive, given that this individual was not breaking into anyone's home, given that he knew nothing about this individual, given that Trayvon had no weapon on him whatsoever. So why would you conduct yourself in that fashion?
He was not breaking the law. It's not as if somebody had to come and take him away or take him out because he was burglarizing a home or he didn't have any right to be there at the time. I mean, he had a perfectly legal right to be there with no weapon. And so, again, the motive is very critical.
And one of the things, let me just mention, one of the things that is most critical is the experts that have come to the conclusion that that was Trayvon screaming in the background, because that cut against some of what Zimmerman had said early on. And, if you are the aggressor and if you are winning this battle, I doubt it if you're doing a lot of screaming. But that's just me on the outside looking in. There's more evidence to be heard and to be seen. But that is something that kind of puts in perspective what was going on.
Well, part of what has to be interpreted is who was the aggressor. It depends on which story that you believe. As it relates, going back to this issue of evidence, and Royce, you used a really interesting word, that it's stubborn. This forensic evidence is stubborn. But because it's all, quote unquote, as I understand it, circumstantial, there's no direct evidence. Doesn't it sort of leave it open to manipulation, interpretation by both sides?
Of course, but 90% of cases, or more, 90% of cases are circumstantial. So there's no smoking gun. But this is what we do. We take the evidence, we try to reconstruct it, we try to prove one story or disprove a story. I think that this will come together. You got to look at all the pieces of the puzzle. There'll be a psychological profile of George Zimmerman to try to figure out where he was. Was he a racist? Was he not a racist? Was he fearful for his life? All of that will come together, and jurors are going to have to weigh all of this and put it together. Physical evidence is going to be important because it doesn't lie. How you interpret it may be wrong, but the evidence is there to be interpreted.
And one of the things that is key in this case is that you have the physical evidence, but in a case like this, I think the jurors are going to want to hear from the only person that can tell a story, and that is Zimmerman. And that's going to be the deciding factor whether or not he takes a stand. And if he takes a stand, they'll get an overall impression of who he is and what he's about. I don't care how well you prep someone. You can read between the lines.
It'll be interesting to see if he will. Just yes or no, do you think he will?
I think he will.
You think he will? Well, we will see. We're certainly going to keep watching this. Royce Russell, thank you so much as always. Dr. Lawrence Kobilinsky, thank you for explaining complex things in a way that we can all understand. We appreciate it. We'll see you guys again soon.